So this is the number 10 as far as videos go, lectures on philosophy. The other one just came up. Did anybody have problems seeing it? It literally just went up like yesterday. I'm sorry it took so long.
I haven't seen that one then yet, no.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's great. It's awesome.
Okay.
I'm going to start putting, I'm joking. It's just typical. Okay, so here's the thing. I want you to know that I'm going to start putting up these tests, okay, quizzes. They're not, and I told you could use their open note, open book, open resource tests, quizzes, okay? It's going to be just going through the lectures and readings of what you've learned. They're going to keep you accountable to the knowledge or to the information so that you can stick it into your mind, okay? So you can walk out of here with a philosophical education. It is really up to you this semester, more so than it will be in any other semester because of the way we're doing this, to really learn the material and learn to value it on your own. You got to value it on your own for you to learn. If you don't value it, you will just get me through the test and then get me on to my degree, okay? But I want to remind you, no matter what your degree is, what's your degree again, sir? Kinesiology. You are two things. You're a citizen of a country and you are a philosopher, okay? No matter what country you go to, you may change countries in your life, and thus if you learned American government from me, you would then go, well, I don't need that anymore, right? Because you say go on to Germany or wherever, and you'd have to learn their government, okay? So you could be a good citizen there. That is important to know, but you will always be a philosopher no matter where you go, okay? And you will ask the questions. What is good, true, and beautiful, right? Mm-hmm. And so you will perform as a philosopher no matter where you go. That is why I want you to value this, so that when you learn here, you take it with you, so that when people are trying to tell you X is true, you can ask the question, oh, really? Okay? Because you don't want to be taken away with whatever anybody says, because let's pretend Perry, what's that girl's name? Katy Perry knocks on your dorm room, right, door, and you're like, oh my God, it's like Katy Perry. And she's like, oh my God, are you gonna be voting tomorrow? And you're like, yes, I am. Why, you wanna go to the voting booth with me? She says, well, only if you vote for Joe Biden. And you're like, well, gosh, this is Katy Perry. And Katy Perry, is she married?
I don't know.
Oh, she is? Okay.
She's married and she have a daughter.
Oh, she was married. Well, so when she was, the last election, she was going around knocking on dorm rooms saying, are you going to vote for Hillary Clinton, right? And I'm sure a bunch of dudes were like, so you're saying I got a chance, kind of like, vote the way Katy Perry does. Maybe she'll like me. I don't know, right? But did you ever ask the question, I mean, many of these people, I wonder if Hillary Clinton is the best, candidate. Is it true that she would help us have the old philosophers would say, the best form of government? Or would there be another one? Would that be true or false? That's beside the point. Don't be carried away just because somebody's pretty or popular, right? You don't want to you want to be thinking on your own, for yourself, and be capable of this. You want to walk out of here smarter than you were. Able to think. Not knowing what to think, but how to think. Does that make sense? Because there are a lot of, in your case, theological positions. You're going to have to wade through. You're going to ask the question, what is the best theological model that I'm going to adopt? You should say, well, the true one, of course, right? Well, then you're going to have to learn philosophy, because philosophy is known as the handmaiden of theology. So if you're a philosopher, it's very important to what you do, no matter, in your case especially, okay? It's important to all of us as citizens. Some of us, it's important to us actually as our vocations. But just as citizens of humanity, it's important to us, all right? So we've been talking about epistemology, and we talked a little bit about science the last time. we were here. Was anybody here for that lecture? No, it doesn't matter. It's on the video. It cuts short really abruptly, but don't worry. I think it cuts off with like only 2 minutes left, and I think I was like, well, forget that. All right, we'll go home. So don't worry about where it cuts off. We were talking a little bit about science. Science is that, that word, that Latin term scientia, right? Which just means what?
Knowledge.
Knowledge. And in Greek it was episteme, which means knowledge. So geology is science. Is knowledge? Is that really what? Chemistry is what? Science. Therefore, is history science?
It could be argued.
Could it? I didn't have it. Yeah, it's funny. I said, did you take note? Geology is science, right? And everybody's like, yeah. Chemistry is science, right? Oh, yeah, okay. And then I say, what about history? And you go, it could be argued. Not a yes, but it has to be argued for. Somehow geology doesn't have to be argued for.
I guess because there's we're more inclined to think of that as a science.
Why? Because you were brought up that way. That's it. There's no reason why otherwise. Look, if they just got rid of the term science, as far as the department went, and maybe we'll call it natural philosophy, as they might have used to call it. Now you would go, okay, we're just talking about things that are physical.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what they mean by natural. They don't mean by, anything deeper than that. And so they go, okay, we're going to study things that are physical. Geology, rocks, hey, that's physical. That makes sense. Okay, what about chemistry? Chemicals? Well, that sounds physical. Let's study that. Okay, cool. We'll call that. Those are clearly two different fields of study, aren't they?
Yes.
At least two different subjects. Why should we call it one field, though? It's science. This is science. And all of this sharp division. Like, you could have knowledge in this area, but everything else is just mere speculation and has to be argued for. As though these things are scientific facts, and we don't argue about scientific facts, do we?
Not in this day and age, no.
No, actually we do.
Oh, well, yeah, you're right.
I mean, not to be contrary to what you say, but that's the whole nature of science, is to try to prove something, or to disprove something, or to find, or to discover, right? I mean, think of all the attempts to create a cure to the coronavirus vaccination. They say we're getting pretty close, right? Bunch of trials out there, but how many failures have there been? More failures than successes so far?
Yeah.
I'd say so. Of course, not all science is true, which is weird. Not all knowledge is true, right?
Right.
But that's because we're not using science univocally. We're equivocating. We're using science in this case as just a branch of study, not as the word knowledge. Okay? So not all scientific inquiry ends up in knowledge. Some would say not all knowledge is scientific inquiry either. It just depends on what you mean by science. What does the word, when you think of science, what makes something science nowadays? And I don't mean the word knowledge.
I guess if it can be, if it can adhere to the scientific method, if it can be proven,
Good.
what's the word?
Can I stop you there?
Yes.
You said the scientific method, right? Is there only one? The answer is no.
Okay.
There are many. The second thing I would ask you is, and by the way, that's in the other video, so you can watch it. But the other thing I would ask is the scientific method scientific? How do you know you got the right method? Let's pretend, you read the books, every science book. You look at, I can pick up any science book, textbook right now. Astronomy, got one. I could take my biology textbook off the shelf. I could take my chemistry book off the shelf. They all, sociology, okay, even the social scientists. And there, in the beginning, is a statement about what you just said, the scientific method, okay? Let me ask you a question. Is the scientific method testable by science?
No,
No, it's not. Why not?
because it requires you using the scientific method to figure it out, but you can't.
Well, I mean, first of all, if you take what the scientific method is, the statement, that definition is something that cannot be observed.
Mhm.
It's assumed.
Mhm.
The scientific method that is presumed is a statement about philosophy, which is not necessarily a good and unique method, okay? So, I mean, there are many scientific methods, okay? There's a hypothetical deductive method, okay? If then, right? If I stick this stick in a glass of water, it will bend, right?
Mhm.
And of course, then you go, if I observe, then I observe it. I see that it bends, therefore I conclude that water bends sticks. Of course, I also have to, part of the scientific method has to do with repeatability, right? So if I repeat the experiment and it keeps happening, I go, yeah, it's repeatable too, right? But of course, we know water doesn't bend sticks, right? So we'd have to explain something. Sometimes the scientific method isn't about proving. Sometimes it's trying to explain the phenomena. Why does light why do sticks appear to be bent when you stick them in water? When we know that they're not, even though they follow that scientific experiment, right? Now, yeah, part of the scientific method has to do with explaining phenomena. Another method of, the scientific method, another method I should say that is scientific, is nothing more than categorization, like placing things in certain categories, in kingdoms, and in phylum or whatever. You got the category of the species and the genera, right?
Mhm.
You could take, things that exist, you could break them into animate and inanimate objects, right? And then you could take the animate objects into which is biological, right? And you can say, break that into two, and you go animate versus inanimate, living versus non-living, that is, then animate versus inanimate, plants versus animalia. Then you could take animalia and you could break it into sentient versus non-sentient, or say, and then you go on to moral versus immoral, all that, all the way down to rational, living things. And you break them up into little categories, right? And you ask the question, where does a raccoon fall in this genera species breakdown, and where does humanity fall, right? Well, humans are going to be rational animals.
Mhm.
Raccoons are not. And so is that science? Well, zoology don't we break down species of animals and stuff that way? Is that not a science?
Yes.
Is not kinesiology the breaking down of the body into its parts and how they work, describing, not predicting, right? That part that may involve discovery too, but you're observing in this case, in a way, and just describing what you see. It's inductive. There's nothing deductive about it. If then, deductive. Inductive, A. Here's looking at it, okay? All ravens are black. Well, how did you know? Well, I looked at all the ravens and they were what?
Black.
Black. Did you look at all the ravens?
No, just the ones that you had access to.
Sure, of course. Why did you choose ravens in general? Why did you choose these ravens at this particular place? So there are a lot of decisions being made here, especially when you chose the place I see a lot of ravens there. So well, what about the places you don't see a lot of ravens? Why didn't you go there? Maybe you would have found a white or a blue raven there. So it's kind of biased towards, you're hoping to find the most ravens. You go for the most rather than all. Okay, and there's a problem with inductivism, right? The inductive method. One day you might find a blue raven, right? Water boils at what?
100 degrees Celsius.
Okay. Always?
No.
No, it doesn't.
Mm-mm.
Is there? So you can go home one day, and one day it'll be at 30, and all of a sudden it's gonna boil one day?
Uh,
It's possible.
yeah,
Because we've not, we have not looked at every time. We've not observed it every time. Hume brought this up. This idea of the problem of inductivism is you never know. We're only making claims about what we observe. Because we haven't observed everything all the time. It is possible, in theory, that it could happen, right? So when you universalize something and you say all ravens are black, really what you mean is all ravens thus far that have been observed by me at least, or at least by those who observe ravens, have been black. This is a raven, therefore it must be black? Only if all ravens that exist in all time are black. Okay? Now you could say that about triangles. All triangles are three-sided objects because by definition they are three-sided objects, correct?
Okay, yeah.
All triangles are three-sided objects. This is a triangle, therefore it's a three-sided object. But ravens are different. Ravens are not black by definition. As a matter of fact, African Americans are not necessarily black by definition.
Right.
And by black I mean, they're black African Americans who are, or African Americans who are albino.
Right.
Okay. So all African Americans have dark skin. False.
Mm-hmm.
It's not true. It's not true because even I have seen that. But you can imagine a possible world in which that happens.
Right.
You don't even have to actually see. You just have to be able to imagine it. We're going to talk more about that because as we talk about science, we're going to transition into metaphysics, which is the second area of philosophy. So I want you to watch that video, the last one. We talk a little bit more about science like we just did today. I also want you to read, if you can, you can look up an article I wrote. You know my name. And it is Science the Enemy of Religion? There are two articles you should read that I wrote. Is Science the Enemy of Religion? And this will help you understand some of my lectures, okay? And the other one is, do atheists hold the intellectual high ground? I think it's, do intellectuals really hold the intellectual high ground? Atheists really. And so I use a lot of epistemology in both of those, and I use philosophy of science, obviously, in the first one. All right, let's talk a little bit about, transition a little bit into metaphysics, because if we're talking about science, we're often talking about physics, that which is physical. But what about metaphysics? Has a tendency to talk about which is after physics. Some things we think of as non-physical. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about what does metaphysics study?
Existence, the world.
The world. Thank you for remembering the lecture on that. And so we ask certain questions of what does it mean to exist? What types of things exist? What does it mean to exist? How do we categorize those things that exist? Aristotle was great at that. So let's take the word world, and what does the word world mean if metaphysics studies it? Everything that exists. Everything that exists.
Is that your definition? The world is everything that exists? Okay.
Yeah, not Earth. Earth is part of that.
Okay.
You know, when you get Atlas's map of the world, right? And it's Earth, I would say it's a little short, short-sighted. I would go a little broader when philosophers talk about the world, we talk about everything that exists. Everything. Not everything on earth. And some people go, oh, you mean the universe? And I would go bigger.
Because that's just what's physical.
Yeah, but I'd say everything that exists. Now, that would now, of course, there are certain philosophical presumptions people have about what exists, and they'd say, well, that's all that exists. Okay, fine. But then there are others who would say, no, there's more than that. Okay? You know, a lot of these people talk about, you know, multiverses, you know, like there's more than one universe. Well, that would include, the world would obviously include all those.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Because I'm not just talking about the universe, a universe, right? So there are options we have. And I'm going to give 3 major options of what exists. And before I say that, I'd say sometimes if you ever hear people talk about metaphysics, they may also refer to it as ontology. O-N-T-O-L-O-G. Okay, ontology. And it's just theories of existence. But let's get back to the 3 options we have. And the first option, let's say one might believe that everything that exists is physical. It would say every single thing that exists is physical. Another option one might hold is that everything is non-physical. Like all these things that you think are physical, like chairs and, you know, phones and books and stuff, that's illusion, non-physical. Remember the phenomenalists?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the first people are called naturalists. Okay? Now, keep in mind, there are people who will say, I'm a naturalist, and what they mean is they study nature. That's not what I mean. A philosophical naturalist is one who believes that the world, everything that exists, is made up of physical things and only physical things. That everything that exists is physical. And that if it is non-physical, then it doesn't exist. Okay? Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So, if one is a naturalist, do they believe in God?
No.
Not unless God is physical. Okay? Do they believe in angels? Not unless angels are physical. Okay? The other one option, which says that everything is non-physical, they're called idealists. Now, as you read Plato, not really discussed too much yet, with the exception of Phaedo. You get the doctrine of ideas. That is, there are forms in heaven, right? In Plato's heaven,
Mm-hmm.
called the ideas. These are things beyond our physical world. So like we have the concept of a chair, and then we have the instantiation of a chair, right?
Okay.
I have the idea of a table, and there it is in the mind. Okay. Of course, there's no mind in Plato's heaven. It's, you know. Okay. Now there's Plato's God, but Plato's God is not necessarily a being with thought and intent and will. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay. What are those guys called? The idealists. Everything is non-physical. Does this sound crazy to you guys?
No. I can see how people can believe it.
So, how about you up there? What do you think of that?
After researching it for the assignment, I guess I
Look at you